Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The air in the hospital room was still and heavy, thick with the scent of antiseptic and the silent, deafening echo of a life abruptly ended. For Drew Kane, the world had narrowed to this single sterile point. The steady rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor that had been a fragile thread of hope for the past 24 hours had fallen silent, replaced by a continuous, unforgiving flatline tone that seemed to scream into the quiet. A doctor, his face a mask of professional sympathy, had just spoken the words, "We did everything we could. I'm sorry for your loss." But they hadn't registered, not really. They were just sounds empty of meaning. Ned Quartermaine, his cousin, his friend, a man of immense vitality and sharp wit, was gone. Just like that. A catastrophic cerebral hemorrhage following a fall that, at first, had seemed manageable. A bump on the head, a concussion, they'd said. Then a sudden turn. A crash cart. A frantic, desperate flurry of activity. And then nothing. Drew stood frozen by the window, his back to the bed where Ned's body lay, now respectfully covered with a white sheet. He couldn't bring himself to look. If he didn't look, it wasn't real. If he didn't turn around, Ned was just sleeping, and in a moment, he would stir and make some dry, sarcastic comment about the quality of hospital jello. Drew's fists were clenched so tightly that his short, neat nails dug half-moons into his palms. The physical pain was a welcome distraction from the tectonic plates shifting inside his chest. The door whispered open and closed. He didn't need to turn to know it was Tracy Quartermaine. He could feel her presence. A storm contained within a petite, impeccably dressed frame. She moved to stand beside him, not touching him, her gaze fixed on the same nondescript view of the Port Charles skyline. For a long time they stood in silence, two pillars of grief holding up the weight of the unbearable. "He loved this city," Tracy finally said, her voice raspy, stripped of its usual acerbic edge. "He complained about it incessantly, of course. The corruption, the mob violence, the endless drama. But he loved it. He believed in it. He thought he could fix it with a well-placed donation and a scathing editorial in the Port Charles press." A ghost of a smile touched Drew's lips. He did. He was always trying to civilize the uncivilizable. Another silence, this one even heavier. Tracy shifted, turning her body slightly towards him. He could feel her eyes on his profile, assessing, calculating even in her grief. That was Tracy. She was always playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. "There's something you need to know, Drew," she began, her tone shifting from elegiac to something harder, more deliberate. "Something about the fall." Drew finally turned to look at her. Her face was pale, etched with lines of sorrow and a fierce, burning anger that seemed to keep her upright. Her eyes, usually so sharp and knowing, were red-rimmed but dry. Tracy Quartermaine did not cry in public. Not ever. "What about the fall?" Drew asked, his own voice rough. "The doctors said it was an accident. He slipped on a wet patch on the patio at the Quartermaine mansion. Hit his head on the stone edge of the fountain. That's what the paramedics said. That's what Olivia said." Tracy's lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Olivia saw what she was meant to see. Or what she wanted to see. The patio wasn't just wet, Drew. It was slick. Deliberately so. A cold knot began to form in Drew's stomach. "What are you saying?" "I've had my housekeeper, the one who's been with me for 30 years, take a discreet look. She found a residue. A clear, odorless gel. The kind you might use in a high-end industrial kitchen to polish floors to a high and dangerously slippery shine. It wasn't there earlier in the day. And it was concentrated exactly where Ned would have been standing to look at the new rose bushes." Drew's mind reeled. You think this was intentional? That someone killed Ned." "I don't think it." "I know it," Tracy stated, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet every syllable was as sharp as a shard of glass. "And I know who was responsible." The world, which had already been knocked off its axis, now seemed to spin in the wrong direction entirely. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was murder. Ned had been murdered. In his own home. The cold knot in Drew's stomach turned to ice, spreading through his veins. "Who?" The word was a low, dangerous growl. Tracy took a step closer, her eyes locking with his. They were filled with a lifetime of Quartermaine cunning and a fresh, raw hatred. She was about to entrust him with a truth that would shatter their family forever. She was about to hand him a weapon and point him at a target. She leaned in, her voice so low it was almost inaudible, yet the 7 words she spoke hit Drew with the force of a physical blow, each one a separate, shocking detonation that stripped away his grief and replaced it with a cold, focused, and all-consuming fury. It was Brooke Lynn. And she wasn't alone. For a moment Drew was certain he had misheard. The words made no sense. They were a nonsensical arrangement of syllables that his brain refused to process. Brooke Lynn? Ned's own daughter? His bright, headstrong, sometimes infuriating but ultimately loving daughter? The one who had been hysterical with grief in the waiting room, sobbing into her mother's shoulder? It was impossible. It was a lie. A monstrous, cruel lie. No, Drew breathed, shaking his head, taking an involuntary step back. Tracy, no. That's insane. That's your grief talking. Brooke Lynn adored her father. She would never. Wouldn't she? Tracy interrupted, her voice cracking for the first time with a mother's agony. This wasn't just about a nephew. This was about a son. Ned was her son in every way that mattered. Think, Drew. Think about what's been happening. The tension between them over ELQ. ELQ. The Quartermaine corporate empire. The family's birthright and its perpetual battleground. Drew's mind, trained in special ops and corporate strategy, began to click into a different gear, pushing past the emotional static. There had been tension. Ned, as CEO, had been making conservative long-term plays. Brooke Lynn, backed by a new aggressive block of shareholders she had been quietly courting, had been pushing for a radical high-risk expansion. They'd had a very public, very heated argument at the last board meeting. Ned had accused her of being reckless, of trying to leverage the company's legacy for a quick profit. Brooke Lynn had accused him of being a dinosaur, of holding her back. It was a business disagreement, Tracy, Drew argued, though his conviction was wavering. A family fight. That doesn't lead to this. It does when billions of dollars in total control are on the line. Tracy shot back, her eyes blazing. It does when a father stands in the way of his daughter's ambition. And Brooke Lynn has always been ambitious. She learned from the best. A flicker of something that might have been pride, or perhaps self-recrimination, crossed her face. But she didn't act alone. She's clever, but she's not this cold. Not this calculating. Who then? Drew demanded, his patience fraying. Who was she with? Tracy's gaze was unwavering. The residue. The specific type of polymer gel. It's not commercially available. It's used in a few specialized fields. One of them is the entertainment industry. For stage floors. To make them slick for dance numbers or for certain stunts. A lead weight dropped into the pit of Drew's stomach. He knew where this was going. The connections began to form. A horrifying constellation of motive and opportunity. No, he whispered again, but this time it was a plea. Yes, Tracy affirmed, her voice grim. The person who has access to that specific material, who has the knowledge to use it without leaving an obvious trace, who has been spending an awful lot of time with Brooke Lynn lately planning her comeback, is the one man in this world who has as much reason to see my son dead as she does. Drew didn't need her to say the name. It echoed in the silent room anyway. A specter of past betrayals and present evil. Spinelli. Well, not Spinelli himself, but his former protege, the one who had embraced the dark side of his hacker genius, the one who had caused Drew and his family so much pain in the past. The man who saw the Quartermaines as the embodiment of the old money establishment he despised. The man who was now Brooke Lynn's business partner, her confidant, and, if Tracy's insinuations were correct, her co-conspirator. He's been whispering in her ear, Tracy continued, the words dripping with venom, filling her head with ideas about her birthright, about how Ned was weak, how he was squandering her potential. He's been helping her consolidate power, hack into private servers, dig up dirt on other board members. This was the final step. Remove the only person who could truly stop them. Permanently. The logic was chilling and it was airtight. It fit the facts. It fit the personalities. It fit the monstrous new reality they were now living in. Drew thought of Brooke Lynn's grief in the waiting room. Was it real? Or was it a performance worthy of an Academy Award? He thought of her partner's smug, knowing face, a man who viewed human life as a variable in a complex equation. The fury within Drew began to solidify, turning from a hot, chaotic blaze into something cold, hard and diamond-sharp. A weapon. We have no proof, Drew said, his voice now dangerously calm. The residue is proof, Tracy countered. But it's circumstantial. It wouldn't hold up in court, not against the Quartermaine lawyers and the PR machine they would unleash. We go to the police with this now, and they'll bury it. They'll have Olivia convinced it was all a terrible accident. They'll have Brooke Lynn playing the heartbroken daughter, and that viper will slither away untouched. They'll get away with it, Drew. They'll get away with murdering my son. The raw pain in her voice was a gut punch. She was right. This wasn't a matter for the Port Charles PD. This was family business, and it required a family solution. What do you want me to do, Tracy? Drew asked, though he already knew the answer. He was looking into the eyes of a lioness whose cub had been taken, and she was recruiting him for the hunt. Tracy's hand came up and gripped his arm, her fingers like steel. I want you to make them pay. Not with the law. The law is too slow, too blind. I want you to use your skills, Drew. The skills Jason taught you. The skills you learned in the Navy. I want you to destroy them. I want you to take everything from them just like they took everything from Ned. I want you to make them wish they had never been born. The 7 words had been the revelation. This was the mandate. This was his mission. They will, Drew promised, the words a solemn vow. The man of honor and integrity was receding, and the soldier, the operative, was stepping forward. The man who had been held captive, brainwashed, and tormented, the man who knew how to fight a shadow war, was now fully awakened. They will wish they were dead by the time I'm through with them. A single traitorous tear finally escaped Tracy's eye, tracing a path through her expertly applied makeup. She didn't wipe it away. He loved you, Drew. You were the brother he never had. Avenge him. She gave his arm a final fierce squeeze, then turned and walked out of the room, leaving Drew alone with the body of his cousin and the crushing weight of his new purpose. The next few days were a study in controlled fury. Drew moved through Ned's funeral like a ghost, his face a mask of appropriate sorrow, but his eyes were constantly scanning, assessing. He watched Brooke Lynn, who clung to her mother Lois, her body racked with sobs that seemed utterly genuine. He watched her partner, who stood at a respectful distance, his expression somber, but Drew could see the calculating light in his eyes. He was observing the dynamics of the family, gauging the power vacuum, looking for his next opening. Drew played his part perfectly. He was the supportive cousin, the grieving family member. He hugged Olivia, he reassured a devastated Monica Quartermaine. He shared quiet memories with Michael and Jocelyn. But underneath the surface, the machine was already in motion. His first stop was the Quartermaine mansion. Using a key Tracy had provided, he let himself in during the quiet hours of the early morning, when the house was empty, the family seeking solace elsewhere. He went straight to the patio. The police had done their cursory investigation, concluding it was an accident. The area had been cleaned, but not thoroughly enough for someone with Drew's training. With a specialized kit he'd put together, he took his own samples from the microscopic crevices in the stone where the patio met the fountain. He bagged them, labeled them. It was a start. His next move was digital. He couldn't compete with Brooke Lynn's partner on his own turf, but he had an ace in the hole. He went to see Spinelli. He found the hacker in his dimly lit apartment, surrounded by the glow of multiple monitors. Spinelli's face was pale, his expression one of genuine distress. He had loved Ned in his own quirky way. Drew man, Spinelli said, his voice heavy. A most tragic and sorrowful day. The fairness in the universe is greatly diminished. It is, Spinelli, Drew agreed, sitting down opposite him. He decided on a direct but partial approach. Tracy has a theory. She thinks Ned's fall wasn't an accident. Spinelli's eyes widened behind his glasses. A theory of foul play? But the constabulary. The police are wrong, Drew said flatly. I need your help. I need you to look into something for me. Discreetly. Anything, Drew man. For the fallen Nedster, anything. I need you to look into the financials. Brooke Lynn's recent movements. Her communications. I need to know if she was planning a major power play at ELQ that went beyond the boardroom. A shadow crossed Spinelli's face. He was uncomfortable. Investigating the stone-cold boss's sister? It was a line he was hesitant to cross. Drew man to infiltrate the digital sanctum of the Brooklynette. It feels dishonorable. What's dishonorable is Ned being dead when he shouldn't be, Drew said, his voice hardening. I'm not asking you to do anything that would harm her if she's innocent. I'm asking you to help me find the truth. If she's clean, this will prove it. If not. He let the sentence hang. Spinelli, torn between his loyalty to the extended family and his desire for justice, finally nodded. The jackal will assist. For truth. For Ned. Over the next 48 hours the pieces began to fall into place. Spinelli, working with a grim determination, uncovered a web of encrypted communications between Brooklyn and her partner. They weren't explicit, they were too clever for that, but the timing was damning. Messages sent and deleted minutes before Ned's fall. Discussions of asset reallocation and leadership transition that were scheduled to be triggered by a catalyst event. Spinelli also found a series of large, untraceable payments from a shell corporation, one with known ties to her partner's various enterprises, into a private account Brooklyn thought was hidden. Meanwhile, Drew's own investigation took a more physical tack. He tracked the specific polymer gel. Tracy was right. It was a proprietary brand used by a film supply company in Los Angeles. A company that had recently fulfilled a large order for a production company that was, on paper, owned by one of her partner's many fronts. Drew managed to get his hands on the shipping manifest. The delivery had been made to a warehouse in Port Charles just 3 days before Ned's death. It was all circumstantial, but to Drew it was a roadmap of guilt. He presented his findings to Tracy in the study of the Quartermaine mansion. She listened, her face a stony mask. It's enough, she said when he finished. It's enough for us. What's the play? Drew asked. We hit them where it hurts, Tracy said, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. We take ELQ away from them. Permanently. You have the votes. With my shares, Ned's shares that you now control as his executor, and the proxies you can gather from Michael and Monica, we can call an emergency board meeting and vote Brooklyn and her associate off the board. We can dilute their stock, render them powerless. It was a ruthless corporate slaughter, a classic Quartermaine maneuver. It was a start, but for Drew it wasn't enough. Taking their company wasn't equivalent to taking a life. It wasn't justice. It was a business decision. That's the first step, Drew agreed. But it's not the last. The emergency board meeting was held a week later. The atmosphere in the ELQ boardroom was frigid. Brooklyn, dressed in a severe black suit, sat at the table, her partner beside her, looking infuriatingly calm. Tracy sat at the head of the table, with Drew to her right. The meeting was short and brutal. Tracy laid out the new voting block. She spoke of Ned's legacy, of stability, of protecting the company from reckless, self-serving interests. She didn't accuse Brooklyn of murder. She didn't have to. The subtext was a roaring torrent in the quiet room. When the vote was called, Brooklyn and her partner were ousted from the board, their voting power neutered in one fell swoop. Brooklyn shot to her feet, her face white with a mixture of shock and fury. This is a coup. You can't do this. This company was my father's. It was, Tracy said, her voice like ice. And now it's mine. And you are no longer welcome here. The partner placed a restraining hand on Brooklyn's arm. He looked at Drew, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. It was a smile that said, I know what you're doing. And this is only the beginning. That smile sealed his fate in Drew's eyes. The corporate destruction was complete, but Drew's vow demanded more. He began to systematically dismantle their lives outside of ELQ. He used his connections to have the LA production company investigated for tax fraud. He leaked documents to the SEC about the Shell Corporation and the suspicious payments to Brooklyn, triggering a federal investigation. He made sure that every business venture, every investment, every backdoor deal the partner had in the works collapsed. He became a specter of ruin in their lives, a force of nature they couldn't see or fight. Brooklyn, stripped of her power, her finances in disarray, and now facing legal troubles, became isolated and paranoid. The performance of grief became less convincing, replaced by a frantic, cornered animal desperation. She tried to reach out to Lois, to Maxie, to anyone who would listen, claiming Tracy and Drew were destroying her out of spite, that they had always resented her. But Drew had been careful. The narrative he and Tracy had crafted was one of protecting Ned's legacy from his unstable, greedy daughter and her manipulative partner. The family for the most part believed it. The final confrontation happened at the old Quartermaine boathouse. Drew had lured the partner there with a fake message about a clandestine business opportunity. He stood in the shadows waiting. The door creaked open. "Hello? Is anyone here?" The partner's voice echoed in the dusty space. Drew stepped out of the shadows. "It's over." The partner turned unsurprised. He smiled that same infuriating smile. "Drew, I wondered when you'd stop hiding behind Tracy's skirts and come to see me yourself." "You murdered Ned Quartermaine," Drew said, his voice flat and cold. "That's a very serious accusation," the partner replied, feigning boredom. "One you can't prove. It was a tragic accident. A slippery patio. A terrible fall. We both know that's a lie. Do we?" The partner took a step forward. "Let's say, for argument's sake, that it wasn't an accident. Let's say someone decided that an obsolete CEO was a problem that needed to be solved. It was just business, Drew. You of all people should understand that. ELQ was being held back. Now it can move forward. Under new, more dynamic leadership." "Brooklyn's leadership? The leadership you just lost." The partner's smile tightened. "A temporary setback. There are always other avenues. Other companies. Other families." The casual way he spoke of Ned's death as a business transaction, the utter lack of remorse, ignited the last of Drew's restraint. This man saw people as pawns, as obstacles. He had turned a daughter against her father, and thought it was just a clever strategic move. "There are no other avenues for you," Drew said, taking a step forward. "Not in Port Charles. Not anywhere. I will spend every dollar I have, every breath in my body to make sure you have nothing. No money, no power, no reputation. You will be a ghost." For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed the partner's face. He was realizing this wasn't a corporate rivalry. This was personal. This was a vendetta. "You're as bad as Jason Morgan," he sneered, trying to regain the upper hand. "A blunt instrument. A thug." Jason understood that some lines, once crossed, require a permanent response, Drew said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You crossed that line when you laid a hand on my family." He didn't throw a punch. He didn't need to. The physical violence he was capable of would be too quick, too merciful. The destruction he had set in motion was far more complete. He had taken their future. He had ensured that Brooklyn would live the rest of her life shrouded in suspicion and failure, and that her partner would be a pariah, hunted by authorities and enemies alike. Tracy knew the moment she stepped into the Quartermaine living room that the air had changed, that grief had settled into the walls like winter frost. She had spent a lifetime pretending that loss didn't touch her, that Quartermaines didn't break. They simply reshuffled their power and kept moving. But this time it was different. Ned was gone. Her son, her infuriating, stubborn, loyal son, had taken his last breath far too soon, and the world seemed quieter in a way that felt downright wrong. She tried not to think about the echo of his voice, or the way he used to challenge her decisions. She tried not to think about the pride she felt in him even when he frustrated her. Drew was standing by the bar pouring a glass of water, though she knew he probably wished it were something stronger. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the guilt he tried to hide. The Quartermaines always looked guilty, even when they weren't. Drew turned when he heard her footsteps. "Tracy," he said quietly. "How are you holding up?" She didn't answer at first. She wasn't sure she could. The entire house felt full of ghosts, and she wasn't in the mood for small talk. But then she saw something in Drew's expression, something that tugged at her resolve. Maybe it was the remorse. Maybe it was the confusion. Maybe it was that he looked like he didn't belong here anymore, like Ned's death had pushed him out of alignment. It made her bristle. Quartermaines didn't retreat. They faced the truth whether they liked it or not. He set the glass down and stepped closer. "If there's anything you need, anything at all, I'm here." She exhaled, the sound sharper than she intended. "Oh please. If I need anything, I'll get it myself." He nodded, accepting the blow without protest. That irritated her too. Ned would have snapped back. Ned wouldn't have just absorbed it. Drew moved toward the fireplace where a framed photo of Ned sat beside an arrangement of white lilies. He loved this family, Drew said. Even when it wasn't easy. Nothing in this family has ever been easy, Tracy retorted. There was a long silence, the kind that made every tick of the clock louder. Tracy clutched the back of the sofa as though steadying herself. Drew finally looked at her again, and she could feel the question coming before he spoke. Tracy, what are you not saying? She stiffened. The man had nerve, she'd give him that. She crossed her arms and glanced away, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. There was a truth she'd been wrestling with since the moment she heard Ned was gone. A truth she didn't want to face. Drew waited patiently, and that only pushed her closer to the breaking point. You want to know what I'm not saying? Tracy snapped. Fine. I'm not saying it because once I do, nothing is the same. Drew frowned. What are you talking about? Her breathing became shallow. The words clawed at her throat. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, drawing strength she didn't feel. Then she finally looked at Drew dead on, her eyes sharp, her voice steady. It's because you failed him when he needed you. Drew flinched as if she had struck him. Tracy, that's not fair. You think fairness has anything to do with this? She shot back. Ned is dead. Dead. And you were supposed to help keep this family together. That's exactly what I've been trying to do. Well, you failed, she said quietly, her tone cutting through the room like a blade. He looked at the ground, guilt twisting through his features. If I'd known anything was wrong, Stop, she said. Don't insult me with excuses. He lifted his head, eyes red with anger and grief. What exactly are you accusing me of? Nothing, she said. Yet everything. Drew took a slow breath. If you want to blame me because it's easier than facing what happened, fine. But I cared about Ned. Whether you believe it or not. Tracy felt her throat tighten painfully. She didn't want to cry, especially not in front of him. The truth was simple. It wasn't Drew she was angry at. It was the universe. It was time. It was herself. But Drew was standing here, and she needed somewhere to put her rage. He stepped closer. Tell me what this is really about. She shook her head, swallowing hard. You wouldn't understand. Try me. Something in his tone, steady, patient, infuriatingly calm, made her break. She inhaled sharply, fighting to maintain control. I wasn't there, she said finally. I wasn't there when my son died. Drew softened. Tracy, no one knew. Don't you dare tell me what I should or shouldn't feel. She pointed at him with a trembling hand. I spent years pushing him, criticizing him, demanding he live up to some impossible Quartermaines standard. And now he's gone. And the last real conversation we had, I was berating him about ELQ. Drew stepped closer but didn't touch her. You loved him. He knew that. She bit back a sob. Did he? Yes, Drew said firmly. He absolutely did. She wanted to believe him, but the doubt gnawed at her. Finally she turned away and walked to the window, staring out at the dark lawn. Everyone expects me to just keep moving. To be strong. To take charge. But I don't know how to do that without him. You don't have to handle this alone. She laughed bitterly. That's exactly what I have to do. Because that's what's left. He walked toward her slowly. Tracy, you're grieving. It's okay to admit you need help. She spun around. And who exactly am I supposed to lean on? Anyone who cares about you, he said softly. She let her eyes drift over him, studying him. Drew had a way of grounding himself even in chaos. Maybe that was why Ned respected him. Maybe that was why she was so furious, because Drew represented the kind of steadiness she didn't have. And because the truth she'd been holding back was finally clawing its way out. You really want the truth? She whispered. Yes. She took a deep breath. The room felt suddenly smaller. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She stepped closer, her voice low but razor sharp. The 7 words you need to hear, she said, are not for comfort. Drew froze, realizing he was about to hear something he wouldn't be able to unhear. Tracy exhaled slowly, and then she delivered the 7 words that would change everything. ELQ is yours now. Don't betray Ned. The words ripped out of her like a confession and an accusation all at once. Drew's eyes widened. He hadn't expected that. Of all the things she could have said, that wasn't even on the list. Tracy, he said quietly, I'm not trying to take ELQ. No, she said sharply. But you could. And people are going to expect you to. People will push you, tempt you, manipulate you. And you're going to have to decide what kind of man you want to be. Drew looked at her with shock fading into something steadier. You think Ned would want me to run the company? I think, Tracy said, her voice breaking, that Ned would want someone with integrity to protect what he built.